I'm super, super excited for this conversation. Everybody who is joining us, feel free to say hello in the chat. I'll also invite the panelists to do the same. Awesome, cool, we're already there. To say hello, drop in any, where you're tuning in from, what brings you to the conversation today, and we'll get started. We have lots of really important and juicy things to be chatting about today, so I'll jump right in. For starters, my name is Dallas Barnes. My pronouns are she and her. I'll be moderating this session today. I'm the founder and CEO of Rhea Health. We have a digital platform for personalized contraceptive counseling. I am calling in from Canada, just outside of Toronto. And I'll start off by doing a land acknowledgement. So I am calling in from what's known today as London, Ontario, which is the land of 3 Indigenous nations, the Chippewas of the Thames First Nation, Oneida Nation of the Thames, and the Munsee Delaware Nation. Whenever I do these land acknowledgements, I always try and encourage folks to really think and sit with reflection on why we are called to do land acknowledgements, besides it being something that we do now. I really think that there's a greater calling and a greater opportunity for us to have more dialogue and open dialogue about what we are doing in our daily lives in efforts to support reconciliation. To share a little bit of an example, I had this conversation actually just yesterday with an organization, Femtech Canada, in another regional innovation center in Ontario here about, how are we being representative of what Femtech means and Canada as a whole. Traditionally speaking, Femtech by definition is innovations that disproportionately affect women's health and disproportionately affect communities. However, when we're thinking about remote communities and Indigenous communities specifically within Canada, oftentimes their innovation looks a lot different than what, say, my innovation would look like. And so being representative of those experiences and Canada as a whole, what do we need to do in order to support that to move forward collectively? Is that redefining what Femtech is? Is it redefining how we're engaging with these communities? I think the point of me explaining this and sharing this story is to get everybody thinking, okay, what more can we do with this land acknowledgement and the time taken to do these acknowledgements? What more can be done? Awesome. I would love to start by calling to the panelists to give a brief introduction of what you do, who you are, what brings you to this conversation, and any other fun thing that you want to share. Kristen, I'll start with you if you don't mind.
Yep. Hi, everyone. I'm Kristen Brillantes. My pronouns are she, her. And I work at the intersection of service and business design, and then also human development. And so a lot of the work that I do is strategy work for people who are working as like ecosystem builders. They all have visions for like what we want the future of work to look like. But I try to make sure that whatever they build strategically and then operationally for themselves and their teams is sustainable so that people don't burn out along the way. I've been meeting a lot of folks who have, again, really ambitious visions for what they want things to look like, especially as we heal. But those are the people who I'm always like, please don't burn out of your passion of where you want these things to go. And so that's what brought me here today.
Thank you so much for sharing. Vicki, I'll pop it over to you.
Hello, everyone. Happy to be here. Vicki Saunders, she, her, joining you from Treaty 13 in Toronto, so-called Toronto. I am the founder of Corliss, formerly known as SheEO, and we are a global community of women who are pooling our capital and funding the kind of businesses that we'd like to see the economy look like, which is super different than what our economy actually looks like right now. I can tell you from doing this for 7 years, it's been really fun to do this as a community. And I really like this topic because at a pretty young age, a few people in my family had chronic fatigue syndrome. And so I, in my early 20s, realized that, oh, you don't have endless energy? Interesting. Okay. So, and it's important to manage this stuff. So I've been on a journey, like my whole life, actually, just really playing with all kinds of different ways to create organizations and org structures that work for humans instead of the other way around. And I took a big 6-month sabbatical last year. And at that point, our organization changed its name while I was gone. And so I took a big trust fall, and it felt like a lot of feedback I've had ever since doing that is, well, if you can take a break like this, maybe I could too. And just basically giving each other permission to create the kind of life we want. So I'm keen to share some of the learnings from that, and happy to be here. And thanks for the invitation.
Amazing. Serian, finally.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Serian Strauss. I go by she, they pronouns. I am here in the Confederated Villages of Lisjan, also known as San Leandro, California. Thank you for the land acknowledgement, Dallas. And I actually think holding the context of land as we think about burnout is actually maybe not seem so directly connected, but being on stolen land and is, I think, very relevant to the conversation of burnout. And so really appreciate the opportunity to be in this conversation, something I feel really passionately about as a person who burnt out myself. I'm now a coach, I'm a facilitator, a ceramicist. I work in equity and justice work, really looking at how both our individual lives and our collective and our systems contribute to our existence, and really looking towards how can we live in the most free and liberating way with ourselves and the planet is really what's my jam. So really excited to be here with you all.
Wonderful. And thank you all for being here. I'm super excited to dive into all of these conversations and learn more about the three of you. I myself have also faced some burnout in the past, being a founder and, going through uphill battles of working in a space that is often stigmatized. It's challenging, and it takes a lot out of you emotionally, mentally, and honestly, physically as well. I would love for this discussion today to be quite interactive. So I do encourage folks to put any questions into the chat. I'll save those for the end. I'm hoping we'll have some time to answer some questions, but please feel free to interact at any point in time. The first thing that I want to tackle, and I'll also put it to the chat and open it up to the audience to chime in, but I would love to just start by laying the land. We are here to chat about burnout. The topic is 100 hours a week plus lack of self-care equals burnout. There's so much to unpack just in that. But let's start with, what is burnout and what causes it? Either speaking to personal experience or by definition. I would love to hear the panelists' thoughts on that. Serian, do you want to start us off?
Sure, absolutely. I think, the way I hold burnout now is a symptom of a bigger issue. Burnout is the manifestation on an individual, can look very different ways. It actually looks like an illness. That's how it looked on me. And talking to a lot of people, the symptoms of burnout, fatigue, inability to make decisions, lack of drive, questioning thoughts, all the things that are very look a lot like both struggles with mental health, physical health. I think of it really as if we're being really direct and honest, we are a lot of us in a capitalistic society that is extractive. A lot of our work, even if it's very mission driven, can fall into, no time is enough time, no work is enough work done. We're always in sort of this deficit mode. And so burnout for me feels like a very natural symptom and a result of a system that isn't actually very human focused, even when we are trying our best to do so. So I look at burnout, if we're just going to treat the symptom itself, it's really important. We need to make sure people are healthy and well. And then there's like a bigger context that needs to be held, like how are our interpersonal interactions, and then what is our organizational structure and systems in there in the day-to-day, not just the mission, but like how do we actually work together in an organization, and then how's that informed with the structures and the systems in our society and how we're living. And so I'm like, that's how I hold it. I hold it as like an individual, interpersonal, organizational systems layer. Like when we think about an individual struggling with burnout, and who disproportionately experiences this often is marginalized people. So I'm like holding all of that as I look at it, because, you know, me falling on the floor at work because I burned out is like, yeah, I need to be picked up and helped out. And there was a lot of stuff going on previous to that moment that I think is important for us to be looking at as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And that like idea of needing to be picked up, like literally and figuratively, and feeling that like physical and emotional for sure. Kristen, anything to add? What would you say your definition, or what would you say your definition of burnout is, and what would you say causes it?
Yeah, I think for me, my experience with burnout had always been around spending absolutely everything you've got, from like fucks to give, energy, like time, all your resources to a thing where sometimes it's like within your control of trying to get to like an end result, but oftentimes to something that isn't actually maybe what you want or was like put upon you. And it, for me especially, like I feel it on a few different intersections. There's like the burnout that I've experienced in a corporate setting because you're trying to do work that matters, you're trying to feel included, you're trying to feel seen, but sometimes those environments create so much stress that you have to put out so much more to be able to like get there. And then I also feel it on this other spectrum of like my family life. I'm a primary caregiver for parents that are elder parents. My parents had me when they were in their 40s. And so at an earlier age, I experienced a lot of like the caregiving required of that. I'm also Filipino, and in Filipino culture, if you're the one person tapped in your generation to take care of everyone, so like sending money back home, taking care of people here, like somebody's nephew needs like somebody to buy all their wrapping paper, like you're the one that gets hit up. So there's like these two experiences that I've constantly had to figure out how to juggle while also carving out an experience for myself as an individual. And so I've experienced burnout and trying to like do the most across all of those spaces, because the narrative for me, both as an American, as a child of immigrant, was make the most of what you have. And that has always been a very draining experience. So when I got involved in working in design and design thinking and getting to see how that was applied to spaces where it's like you can do things more efficiently or effectively, or even really questioning like first principles about why you do what you do, that's how I've started to develop more of a practice of like, how do I think about my resources as my resources? And I'm hoping that when all of us having more conversation about burnout, that we get to normalize and pay attention to, can we be in a state where we're not over optimizing our resources, where we can be in a state where like there's some stuff that we don't spend, you know? So that's mostly been like my experience.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think, you know, the worker today, if you will, has really changed and evolved. And some good things are coming up in the chat where it's not values aligned anymore, or how our structures in our workplaces are you know, set out right now do not often, sometimes anyway, align with certain values. Also interesting, Eric shared a link and saying that burnout is not considered a medical condition. And so to have that more like definition, that dictionary definition anyway of burnout is quite interesting. Vicki, into you.
Yeah, so I work with I'm an entrepreneur. I've been an entrepreneur forever, and I work with lots and lots of entrepreneurs, and our work is never done, right? So that's the other thing too. You can never catch up. You can never be finished, especially when you're doing a lot of systems transformation work. And so, you know, very much like Serian had shared, I really do think that this is a symptom of the structures that we have in place. And it's really like a large part of that is our individualistic culture, me, and this isolation that we're fed as like, I have to figure out how to do this myself. I need to do everything on my own. I have to change the world, as if that's even a thing. Like one person is not going to change the world. And taking all of that on as individual baggage when you see all the stuff that's going on in the world, it's very, very challenging. And so a lot of burnout, so-called burnout things that I see around me are in particular, like a lot of people that get isolated and aren't in community and aren't constantly getting that feedback from others of how are you doing? And like, we each have a little piece of the puzzle to create a great world here. And it's when we get separated off and start to take on a lot of the work as our work, and only I can do this. I have had 2 of these conversations already today where I'm like, there's an endless amount of pain out there, and you do not need to own it all, my friend. It's just really challenging when you're a super empathetic person to see all of that and to be able to like disengage a bit from it so you can do you too. Like it's really, really challenging. And so I think this permission to design the life the way you need to and trust that others around you will take care of the pieces that you don't. We've forgotten a lot of that because we aren't really embedded in community in many ways in a lot of our systems and our structures and the way that our organizations are set up. And so I'm like always living on the flip side of questions, right? Which is like, what is not burnout? Like, that's where I want to live, not in like, what is burnout and staying in that. So those pieces are like, I think very, very critical. And then just this reminder that like, just because this is the way that people are setting up organizations doesn't mean that we need to buy into it. And especially like, I'm speaking from the entrepreneur perspective. It's like you became an entrepreneur to create the kind of world you want. So like, don't set it up like everyone else's if it's not working for you. Go change it. How would you like to do it? What works for you? You can do 3-day work weeks if you want to. If you're not doing crisis management, which we're not, we have, we take off a quarter every, we take off a week every quarter. We take off 3 weeks at Christmas. Like we do all these things to create the conditions so that we can thrive. And then people are like, how do you do that? You just design it. Right. So I think that there's a lot of things around this issue that are a result of the way that we think that we have to do things. And it's really, there's such a moment in time right now to rethink and redesign everything. And so I'm like excited we're having this conversation so that we can all give each other permission to change the crazy, insane way we're doing things.
Absolutely. I think, building for the cultures and for really the life that we want to have, making those choices actively, proactively is super, super important. I do want to lean into, we've already brought up a few different things that I'm really excited to touch on, but I think it's really important to take a step back almost and sort of give a lay of the land. I love, Vicki, that you said, what is not burnout? But I do think it is important that we are understanding how we got here in the first. So I would love to hear from the panelists, what does the historic or even current work culture, work structures, workspaces, what do they look like? Why do they look these ways? And how does that really relate to burnout and to this conversation today? Feel free, whoever wants to jump in on this first, go for it. Oh, Kristen, your audio, I'm not sure if it's just me, but I can't hear you. Oh no. Okay. Sure.
Come back in.
Yeah. Well, maybe in the meantime, I can chime in. I mean, I said it a little bit in the beginning of like, it's really difficult, like, especially in North America, if we're talking about history, to really be honest about the history of where we are right now and what has happened. And so it's difficult not to come straight from like, we are on, like Dallas says, your land acknowledgement, we are on stolen land. Like, why is that? Like, what was the practices? What were the practices? What were the belief systems that brought that about? And whose way of doing things got valued and got passed on to build a society that then later stole people for labor. And then, so there's this like way of like this extraction mindset that, I mean, I have to say, I raise my hand as a person who owns my own business, right? I'm my own boss. I set my own hours. I set my own calendar. Yet, like, I've had to really look at how I am, like, in these subtle, non-really thinking ways, I'm like perpetuating similar behavior and being a really bad boss to myself. I'm like, I only really work for myself. I'm like, why am I feeling so tired all the time? It's like what you were saying, Vicki, and what you're saying, Kristen, as well. It's just like, what kind of boss do I want to be to myself? And like looking at the roots of, well, how am I like ingrained about how I spend my time? What's my worth around work? And then who came up with that? Like, where is the legacy of that story? And can I track it to who gets to benefit as a Black queer person? Like, how am I moving through the world feeling that my worth is my labor? You know, how am I going through the world thinking that if I am not busy, then there is someone who's going to scold me? Like, and I'm like, how do I decolonize my brain? Like, how do I decolonize my own self to create the freedom I'm looking for? So I think thinking about history is actually really critical in this question, because it's like, where did these frameworks come from? And where the origins are actually really dark and hard to look at. And then how do we look at that within ourselves, which I think requires a lot of time, and it's subtle. Like, some of the things are so subtle. The messages I think of, just like, why does it take me 5 days to rest, even when I'm on vacation? So I think of that as well as I think about this question that then leads me to behave in a specific way, and then watch other people behave in maybe similar ways. And so that my change, when I try to change it, I'm actually going against the flow. I feel like I'm constantly trying to swim in a different direction, because the flow is in that, it has that legacy of that history. I don't know. Does that make sense? That's how it's making sense in my mind. Yeah.
No, that totally makes sense. I can add two things that I've been thinking about too, in like how does this all happen and what perpetuates it? Some of my consulting work happens in VC, and you know, when you get to the root of where money comes from and what gets invested into all of these dreams, right? Like all the startups, it's always been wild to me, like the benchmark of 10x returns at 10x speed, like how Vicki was saying, like these are not human. And so when we look at that and we're seeing the shift of like who's giving the dollars out, who's receiving the dollars, when they create this like false sense of scarcity, and then they expect you to return things at that speed, it does create strange decisions, right? Like hire, like maybe don't be as aggressive on your hiring plan, because then you can show more profit, and then you're having people do six jobs. Or again, like, why do you have to have the speed of return? Or why are you trying to be first to market? Like, I remember one time I was watching like a scooter company, right? They were like, be first to market, develop as many scooters as possible. And you could see everybody scrambling. And then you see the impact of that, not just like on the team, but like the producers, all of it. And it's like, there's so much waste that goes out in terms of effort, but then even like the impact on the environment. So I'm constantly asking people, like, why are we driving it at this speed and not thinking about the impact? And then we're now creating like all different other types of, I guess it's like capitalism, right? Like create a problem so that somewhere else you can have a solution. All these other solutions would be like, now let's heal the thing. It's wild. And then the second part where I do see, like, these are more like the sadder parts for me in my work, is when I get to work with people who are in that change making category. Like, we burn ourselves out because there's only so many pockets when you have a chance to influence. And so because power is held in like a very strange way here, in a very abusive way here, once you get into positions of influence, positions of power, and you've never been there before, you have this fear of like, what if it runs out? And sometimes what got you there was you did do a burnout cycle multiple times. So you're like, you don't have any other example of how to sustain it. So for example, with like Vicki saying, like, you have to redesign and reimagine it. If we don't have examples of what that looks like, or if we don't have creative partners to help you feel confident that you doing this alternative way is a good and healthy way, and also letting you let things like fall to the sideways. Cause like essentially what we're trying to say is don't move so fast, like move at a human pace. And that's going to mean that the results that you might be needing to deliver to certain folks might not be in alignment with the way that you want to move. You have to like find your new community partners who are going to do that in a way that's going to like resonate with really how you want to live.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I love the connection to, human burnout to nature burnout. There's definitely a relationship there.
Yeah, because you see it in the news and then everybody's like, what's happening in the world?
Yeah. All those things going on at the same time. I was at an event about 6 months ago, and I was talking about something that we were doing, and an Indigenous elder said to me, Vicki, a short-term project is 40 years. A long-term project is 400.
Mm-hmm.
And this is if you get back to the roots of like cultures that sustain themselves for a long time, like with this idea that I'm going to like change this thing in 5 years, and then we're going to change this, and we're like, it doesn't happen, right? And we're just like running on this sort of like crazy hamster wheel. And this is certainly one of the things that I learned when I was on my sabbatical. I went walking. I did the Camino and a bunch of other walks. I walked 1,400 kilometers or something in 90 days. And I slowed down to the speed of life. And as I like really got into that part of the thing was, I read a lot of poetry at the end of my walks. And part of the thing that came up was that like the heartbeat of the earth is our foot, like walking on the heart of the earth, and all of the information that we need is in the earth, all the intelligence is around us in nature. And as soon as we start going faster than walking, nature becomes an impediment to us actually sensing what's going on around us. And then we want it, like, it's like in the way, right? So we like want to go faster and faster. And then we just miss all of the signs of like what natural processes are. And so, I mean, you had sort of asked some of these issues around why it is the way it is, and what causes some of these things. And I spend a lot of time on myself with this like mantra of follow the energy. So what energizes me and what depletes me? And I pay attention to that like every single day. At the end of the day, I'm like, what energizes me? What's depleting me? How can I not have to do that anymore? Are there people who love to do that where it energizes them? And like in my 20s, I thought everybody hated doing spreadsheets. And now I've learned, oh my God, some people love doing spreadsheets. What? Oh my God, I'm going to give them that stuff because it depletes the crap out of me. And then again, it comes back to this like message around community. It's like, if we entrepreneur together, if we work together, if we're in community together, each of us has something that really energizes us, and it stops us from getting into that, I have to do all these things myself, because the role of founder or the role of CEO or the role, which is set up in a lot of our structures, I think is to control us and keep us powerless, basically, make us think that we're not, and we have to do all these things. Like, it makes no sense the way things are organized at all. There's enough for everyone. We just need to reorganize in a way that shows us that. And so this organizational structure that we've had for the last 400 years is done. Bye-bye. And we now have to get imaginative to think about like what would work for us. How might we shift this?
Absolutely. That's a perfect segue. On that note, I would love to hear from each of you, really like taking it back to, your own work, your day-to-day. I'd love to hear from all of you. What are you doing within your work, your own personal spaces, to really work against these historical structures that we've just been talking about, and actually build towards the changes that we want to see, making those changes and building, those structures and the lives that are aligned with our values. I would love to dive into that piece. Vicki, would you like to start?
Sure. So I think there's this core thing around like, what can you do with ease and joy? What do you do with ease and joy? And I feel like in many of our, like the conditioning that we have when we're growing up, it's like, let's do something really hard. I'm like, why? Why do we have to do it? Like, no, like when anyone who's trying to like start, I had a bunch of dudes at my house trying to like create a new company, and they're like, let's pick something really hard. And I'm like, what if we didn't? What if you pick something that's like really easy for you to do that the world needs too? So I think there's getting into this place of like, we have a story that things have to be really hard, and they're really hard, and you have to be really busy in order to do anything that is meaningful. And what if that is completely false? What if that's part of the challenge? And so I again, like, I'm not saying everything's easy, but I'm saying like, what do you do with these? There are things all day long. I make connections for people because I have like this crazy big network, and that's never on my to-do list to make connections. It's just what I do. And if I could find like a business model to just do that all day, I would, but it's kind of what I do anyway. That is my role here. I'm making connections for people. And then I surround myself with people who are good at other things to make that a whole thing. Like I have part of a brain, and then you have all these other people that make it full. So I think that's one thing, this like querying around how things can be more joyful and with ease as we're doing like heavy, deep work in the world at this really challenging time. I think that the other part that we pay a lot of attention to is like the structure in the organization that we have at Coralus is like, what season are we in? What cadence does that season require? I once heard, I can't remember her name, Kim something right now, but I remember her yelling, we don't yell at kale in January, grow, like it's not the season, And so what season are you in, and what pace might you have during that season, and what works for the collective of us that are working on something together? And just noticing that we go through all of these cycles just like in nature. And if we could organize ourselves a little bit more around that, that could be helpful. So those are like a couple of pieces I'll just sort of drop in.
Beautiful. Thank you. Kristen, I would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah. I kind of try to treat some of my practices now like a workbook. Like I miss the days of when we were kids and you just like fill out cute workbooks. So whenever and my best tool is my calendar, just because like, it's like my one validator of like, am I spending my time on the things that I really enjoy? And I got really nerded out one time about like designing time and designing like your energy. So something that I've done and I try to do with like folks that I work with is doing an observation and like journaling in your calendar, like when do you have your best energy? When do you have your worst? And then for what kind of energy do you need for different types of work that you do? And then I make a list of like the types of work I do, what energy I need. And then I just try to make it like a puzzle, and you kind of turn it into a game. And so I try to do that and renew it every quarter. Or if there's like a big life event that happens, like for example, right now I'm in a big cycle of parent care because like my dad got really sick again. And so I think like being able to tap back in and make sure that that like your time, your planning, your energy are all like living things, and then being really intentional about how again, I try to like work it out, and then spend some time actually reflecting. Like Vicki, when you were giving like the example of walking and setting like the pace, I feel like we don't really take enough time to just like even do that with ourselves, of like doing the reflection even at the end of the week of like, how did that go? Like, is that actually how I wanted my week to go? And then when you look at what didn't go according to plan, or what like moved your energy out of alignment, really taking time to see like, well, what were the things that drew me out? Was it because I was like getting tapped into my helper self and was like trying to like do something for someone that I didn't need to do? Or was it because I didn't give 20% more time to a task of like what it deserved? Versus I feel like a lot of us have that mentality of like, it should only take this much time, but like how much time does it deserve, and how much time does it deserve for you to also enjoy it? I think like even being able to inject joy into all of the things that we do and making that an option helps a ton. And if you can't find a way to integrate joy into it, then is it just like something that you're tolerating on your calendar? And so it's like when you do that type of like small exercise, you really start to get to know yourself and what influences you, and then get really clear of like, what do you want to have influence yourself? So that's like one practical thing that I try to do. And then just really create that more like a practice versus like you said that for a year and then you never look at it. Or people who will sometimes be like, but this is just who I am. I'm like, you can give yourself space to like change and evolve because like your environment's constantly changing and evolving.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I love what you all have said so far. And just to add a few more things, all of the things, yeah, the energy, the way how we spend our time, a reflection about time. I love walking. Vicki did long walks as well as like a way to kind of come back. It's so beautiful to do those long walks. I am going to credit this to an incredible coach, thinker, Brianna Ned, who I took a course with called the Sustainable Life Cadence. And what she said, that kind of blew my mind. Like, she's like, well, what's your purpose and what's your service? Like, what are you doing? Like, what do you think you're here to do as a person, separate from your work? Like what would be like living your best life and like fulfilling? And for me, I have a spiritual practice that's really grounding. Like, what would be my, my practice? We call it like a destiny or an ori, like my head, like, what am I here to do? Like as my human body self in this lifetime. And then your service is like what you do for people that's important to you, and that start to untangle that. Because a lot of us like have our purpose and our service, like really, and I'd never thought of it that way. It totally baked my noodle for a while of like, oh, I always thought my purpose is my service, right? The thing I'm doing is and the way that she put it was that that's another way of extraction. Like if your purpose becomes your service, then how in the world are you going to not feel like you've never given enough? So if my purpose is like to live my best free life, like to be in as much freedom, and my service is really to create more possibility for both individuals and organizations, like there actually is an overlap, but it's not entangled. And so I've been thinking more about that. How am I spending time on my purpose? And how am I valuing that time? Maybe as much as I would value time in my service. And that starts really creating some uncomfortability in my body, because then I really have to look at like, what brings me energy? Like you were both saying, like what is like energy draining? How much buffer am I doing in between tasks? And I've started this practice where I'm not only thinking about like the seasons of the year and like when I have energy in the year and like what my energy level is in the spring versus the fall or the summer. Like when am I like really excited about designing things? Like when do I need to be in reflection and more integration about my year? Like there's that vision. And then how do I think of my time in like a 28-day cycle or a lunar cycle, because I actually am affected by those cycles. And so can I actually kind of deconstruct the month and the days in a different time set that is with my energy, like a different energy flow? Then there's the day of the week, because that's what people work with in this system that I need to then look at. And then what days do I have like different types of energy too? Do I want to be more like creative on Mondays? And do I want to actually do the things I don't really want to do that don't bring me so much joy, Vicki, on Tuesdays? Because then that's the day that's allocated for my, for the things I maybe could learn to love but don't love yet. And maybe I do communications on Wednesday. Like it just I've just sort of like tried different systems and then reflected, which I think is really, really important to be like, how is this working for me? And I have to say, I'm in iteration right now. I'm in practice right now. If I come with something brilliant, I will share it. But right now, I'm just really thinking about, and I'm in community also with a group of people who are also curious about this. So then we have time to reflect together and meet and be like, what's time been like for you? Like asking that question. We asked that question for a full year. What's your relationship to time? We asked it for every meeting for a whole year. Like, what's bringing you joy? Asked it for a whole year and just kind of like tracked it for each other, held space for each other, and that we don't have to do it alone. Again, like kind of trying to dismantle this sort of individual, like burnout is about me trying to like cope with my own self, and how do I invite other people into this process so that it doesn't feel like I have to do it by myself has been really, really helpful. And I've got like so much creativity has come from it. It's like long answer. Thanks for listening. But I'm really excited because I'm like in this like working it out, and some things are really sticking and some things are like, yeah, that's not working for me. So, okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just double down on the whole
Please.
community piece that Serian is talking about. And I feel like Vicki, you brought this up too, like being able to surround yourself with people who are trying to not be in burnout cycles anymore is so important. Like I cannot stress this enough. And I think like sometimes we attach ourselves to like high ambition, high success people without knowing what their lives look like. And when we do that, that like actually just keeps like the cycle going. So if you really are trying to get out of a burnout cycle and trying to like really pave a path that looks really different, it's so important to like be in community with people who are on that journey with you, because especially for those, if you're like the one, you know, everyone talks about the first and only, this exists also for people who are like letting go of burnout life. If you're the first and only in a high ambition group to be like, I don't want that anymore, you're about to trigger everybody in that group, and they will be the first to tell you like, you're doing it wrong. Why aren't you working hard enough? If you don't do that, you won't reach your goal. And I feel like that's always like the first part of whenever you have someone in a coaching session and they're like, I veered off my path. And you're like, what happened? Well, I was having dinner with this one friend and they were the one that told me don't do that. So it's just like the community part, I feel like, because also people talk about community, but I don't think a lot of us really know what that looks like in this new vision. And that even community is getting like co-opted and commercialized. And it's not like community isn't just being around people. It's being around people who like have aligned values, that have designed community practices that support one another. So it just like really wanted to like emphasize that part.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, and these
winging it out here.
Exactly. These conversations are so important. I'm learning a ton. So much that you all are saying is resonating. Thank you so much for being so open. We are coming up to time, but I would love to kind of finish off, you know, what does thinking about all of these strategies and tactics and things that you all have shared, and looking to the future and even to the rest of today and tomorrow even, what does success look like for work cultures, for work structures, and our own daily lives? Would love to hear this either from a personal basis or, you know, these cultures and communities at large. What should we be striving for? What is that ideal picture?
I'll just jump in, and there isn't one. Right. Like I think the whole thing is we're all a constant work in progress, and what worked for me last year doesn't work for me this year. And what works for me doesn't work for you. And so our ability to get into our own intuition, stop outsourcing it to your friend who's clueless and is not in your body. They don't have the same view as you. And it's just like the body doesn't lie. I just put this in the chat, but like we know in our intuition and we're like, oh, I knew that wasn't the right thing. Damn. And like, that's how we learn, by practicing over and over, right? What works for us. And so success for me is, and like Serian, you said it, freedom. Being as free as possible to be me and to give my gifts every day. That's what matters for me, and designing a life that allows me to do that as much as possible every day. Gold.
Amazing. Thank you. Serian, would you like to share?
Yeah, I think it's less about the thing and it's about the who and the questions. Like for me, it's like, am I asking myself the right questions? Am I asking myself like, why? Why am I doing it this way? Is this rooted in anything that's important to me? Or is there other messages coming that are from somewhere else? And I do really believe that any solution, yeah, there isn't one, but will come from unexpected places. Like if we look at nature as our teacher, if we believe healers and artists and Indigenous people and people who have like practices that have not messed up shit, I'm just gonna be real, and we actually value the wisdom that is actually around us, like art, like artists, creatives, like we need to like be thinking about that and value those voices.
We are out of time, but really quick, I don't know if people are still on, but Kristen would love if you share your thoughts as well.
Yeah, I think it's kind of just echoing what they both already said. It's just like if the source is you and you feel good and you feel settled and you feel like you're moving at the pace that you want, that full actualization and self-agency, that's how you'll know that you're doing it.
Wonderful. Well, Kristen, Serian, Vicki, thank you all so much for sharing your thoughts, your hearts, and your time. So nice to connect with you all, and have a lovely rest of your day.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.